There's certainly been accounts of there being solitary and individual dolphins going back for many years. We've had dolphins called Percy and Beaky, a number of them going back over many years. And there's a very famous dolphin, of course, in Southern Ireland in Dingle Bay called Fungi. And Fungi's been around for 20 years or so, which is extremely unusual because, sadly, very often these solitary dolphins die as a result of becoming more and more habituated to humans. And that's either because generally it's because they become harmed by something. There was one not long ago off Southampton which was beginning to become social, and it got hit by a boat.
Oh, dear.
And so there are threats to these animals, unfortunately, when they become socialised. Fungi is unusual. Fungi lives in Dingle Bay, chooses when and when not to interact with humans.
Right.
And also the local people and the local community have huge respect for fungi, and they don't overplay the situation.
Right.
And fungi's managed to survive for many years, which, unlike others, I'm afraid, which don't often.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your organisation, because you're a group of volunteers that are trying to make sure that people like Fungi and Dave or Davina aren't harmed. How did you all get together, and what are you trying to do?
Well, British Divers Marine Life Rescue is the charity, and the UK's leading animal rescue organisation. And we've got strong links with organisations around the world. For instance, we know very well, and we swap techniques and talk quite a bit. British Divers was set up in about 1988, originally when a virus called Phocine distemper virus, PDV, actually came to the UK and wiped out a very high number of seals around the UK. It actually came back in 2002 as well, unfortunately, and didn't take quite so many because there was a bit of a resistance built up. And that some divers, which is why there's a divers part to our name, realised back in 1988 that they had equipment that might be able to be used. They had dry suits, they had ribs in rigid inflatable boats, which could get out to some of the sandbanks and try and rescue some of these seals and start getting them to the hospitals before they succumb to the virus.
Right.
It's grown from there. And British Divers now is not only for divers. I'm not a diver. Probably 50% of our members are not divers. And anyone who wants to can train as a marine mammal medic on a one-day training course.
Wow.
And then join our network of volunteers all around the UK. We've got equipment all the way around the UK and volunteers all around the UK as well. And so when there is a marine animal that's in need, dolphin, porpoise, whale, seal. Occasionally we get the odd marine turtle as well. Then, in fact, we had a basking shark only a couple of days ago up in Scotland, which is quite unusual, of course, because it's a fish rather than a mammal.
Right.
And our guys get called, and we work closely with some of the other organisations like the RSPCA, but they know we're the specialists with marine mammals and will often call us when there's one of these situations. And that's what British Divers is. It's a network of trained volunteers which we ensure is as equipped and trained as possible.
Wonderful. And how many are there of you, roughly?
Well, we've trained probably around about 3,000 or 4,000 people now around the UK. And of course, because it's a volunteer organisation, people kind of come and go as to how active they can be. But we have coordinators all around the UK and sort of teams all around the UK. And certainly we're pretty sure that we can get a pretty quick response when something strands or becomes in difficulty, and then start pulling people into those areas. On our website, we have an area coordinators map, and all the area coordinators are on there, and you can see where they are and their contact details. And so we encourage people to get involved with their coordinators and get involved with their teams, even just going to the pub once every couple of weeks and knowing faces and having a social. And also there are training exercises happening as well.
Ah, yes. Well, down under, of course, you know, we're not into going to the pub or doing anything like that. You'd appreciate this.
Of course not. Of course not. No.
We do have... Sorry.
Carry on.
Now, I was going to say, we do have organisations, perhaps not as organised as yours, around the countryside that do try and do some things. But which is the organisation you work most closely with here?
Well, I mean, is it the Department of Conservation down in Australia? They tend to take a bit of a lead role when you get strandings. And I know that we've had, I think there was a stranding, about 18 months ago over on the, let's get this right, over on the west coast, north of Perth. and there was a mass stranding of pilot whales. You get quite a few mass strandings of animals in Australia. And in fact, the vet on the beach there was consulting with one of our vets over here. So that, again, there's this interaction. There was actually a vet who'd done one of our training courses, strange enough, who now lives in Australia. And we do have, funnily enough, there's one or two of our volunteers have actually moved over to Australia. A good friend of mine, Andy Pitway, now lives just north of Perth with his family. Right. And he used to assist me when I was a coordinator in the charity, and I speak with him quite often. And I'm green with envy as well, because recently he's been out and seen whale sharks and humpback whales, which we don't get around the UK. He contacts me through Skype every now and then and gloats about what wonderful wildlife he's seen.
Well, it must be a little bit odd in some ways, because you talk about the fact that we humans really shouldn't try and interact with dolphins, and yet Australia, and in particular Western Australia, is quite famous for interacting with, Brian, you'll correct me here, what's the name of the group of dolphins in WA that people go over and...
I think Tony might know more than me.
I'm trying to
I think isn't it something called Monkey Mire? Or,
the Monkey Mire. I'm sorry, yes, the area is called Monkey Mire, that's right.
And
that's right. And you've got the dolphins there that come very close inshore and interact. That's interesting, because that's a group of dolphins, I think, which have learned also that they can get food there. But it's a group rather than, I think, a solitary animal.
That's true.
And so there's a different management issue there. And I think also it's very carefully managed so that the public don't become too excited and get too involved with the animals. And also there is another difference, which is that the legislation in Australia is stronger than we have in the UK when it comes to the actual protection of these animals.
Well, yes, you were describing this when we were talking the other day. Now, in Australia it's pretty specific. You've got to stay X metres away in a boat. You can't touch them, etc., etc. What is it in the UK? It's weak, isn't it?
It is weak. I mean, what you've described there is legislation, is law in Australia. Over here, it's simply a code of conduct, so it's not law. The only legislation we have protecting these animals is something called the Wildlife and Countryside Act. I can give you the actual line of legislation, which is that it's an offence to intentionally or recklessly harass any cetacean. That's it.
Wow.
It's as ambiguous and vague as that. What does reckless harassment mean?
Yeah. If Johnny, British person, decides to take his boat out and go whizzing up and down next to a bunch of dolphins or any kind of mammals, then he can do so.
He can, although I know the organisations such as obviously the police and the RSPCA are keen to test this legislation. There is actually a case going through the courts at the moment. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And that is actually concerning Dave the dolphin. A couple of guys were arrested following an incident there. Probably shouldn't talk too much about that, because it is actually an ongoing incident, ongoing case. But it will be interesting to see whether or not that succeeds or not. But certainly the legislation is weak, and it needs defining. We need to have the kind of legislation that Australia, New Zealand, North America has, where you have zones which you can't go within around these animals, and that would make it clear. And I think the public would probably appreciate having that clarity as well, because at the moment it is ambiguous. The situation we have with Dave and with other solitaries is that, especially in the summer months, these animals do tend to get mobbed, unfortunately. And we try, as a volunteer organisation, to advise members of the public. We often have our volunteers on the beach with posters and leaflets and talking to people. But we're not a policing organisation. We're just a charity. We're just a bunch of trained volunteers. And people do tell us to go away, shall I be polite and say that, and say, why are you telling me that I can do what I want, can't I? And of course, the enforcement agencies themselves, like the police, will struggle to be able to do something, because of course they're dealing with many other incidents. But stronger legislation is needed, and we constantly work with other organisations. We have a coalition called the Marine Animal Rescue Coalition here in the UK, which is a loose coalition of organisations involved in marine animal rescue and conservation. You have British Divers Marine Life Rescue, the RSPCA, Whale and Dolphin Conservation Society, I4, and we meet around about twice a year to agree on a combined and agreed way forward with marine animal rescue and conservation. It works very well. And within that coalition, we then have a subgroup which is dealing with solitary dolphins management. And we try and advise the police to try and advise the public on how the public should be behaving and what's and what's the best way to try and manage these very difficult to manage situations. Dave.